Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Javier Rivera. I'm president of the risk management at Ccig. We thought it was important to organize this webinar because as we all try to get back to work safely amid COVID, many of you are finding yourselves facing an epidemic within an epidemic. Substance abuse is not a new problem, but the pandemic certainly has made things worse. We hope that by the end of this 30-minute discussion, you'll feel better equipped to address these challenges in a few new ways. For those of you who are just getting familiar with us, Ccig is one of the fastest growing and largest locally based independent insurance brokerages in the nation. Our operation consists of commercial property and casualty teams, an employee benefits practice, and a highly specialized private client practice serving high net worth individuals. Our mission, of course, is to provide clients with competitively priced insurance products for their business, but we don't stop there. What separates Ccig in the marketplace is our robust risk management team. My team works to deliver proactive loss control support, claims advocacy and management, along with data analytics. All of that work helps our clients create lasting, ongoing safety cultures within their workplace, and as you might imagine, save them money. Our speaker today, Mark Ashby, is president of Lead Impairment Training. Mark and his team have provided substance abuse training to more than 30,000 people, including those at state and federal government agencies. He's been on the front line of this epidemic for a number of years, including a stretch in his career where he served on the Thornton Police Force. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. All of our attendees are listening in using their computer systems, so there's no need to mute yourself. That was already done automatically. You can submit your questions at any time during the presentation using the question pane on your webinar control panel, and we will address as many questions as time allows at the end of the presentation. I know you'll find Mark's presentation intriguing and definitely eye-opening. Mark, take it away.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you again for being here. Thank you to Ccig for putting this together, and specifically for Javier for all the hard work that went into this. So, good morning. Do we have the right to require our workplaces to be safe? Do we have the right to require them to be a drug-free environment? And those are simple questions, but the answers are getting convoluted as we go about. As we go on, we're going to learn that 7% of our workforce, our working workforce, has an alcohol disorder. This shouldn't surprise us. We know that alcoholism and the problems associated with it in our society are a huge challenge. So look at your workforce and say, what is 7%? I submit that number is on the low end, to be honest, unfortunately. And that number came to us from the National Safety Council. So when we move forward, we're going to find out that industries, especially in construction, in mining, have a lot of problems associated with substance use disorders. We're looking at over 15.6% of employees have issues with substances, okay? Now that number jumped from 7 to 15 in a blink of an eye just because you're in construction or mining. So we look at this issue because Colorado has faced this, over the last few years significantly. Is it a big deal if a substance is illegal versus legal? And I submit that we do have issues with that. I think many employers are worried that because of the recent cannabis legalization that now we can't touch cannabis, or that cannabis is allowed in our workforces. What are we going to do about that? And what we do is we look into the meat and potatoes of this presentation. We're going to talk about the recognition of what the problem is. We're going to look at how to respond to the problem. And then finally, we're going to talk about our state of readiness, the state of protection that we need to provide to ourselves, our families, and our companies. First, we're going to talk about emerging trends. So when we look at the problem as a whole, we really need to understand how likely are we to have a problem in our organization, in my company, with my people, with my staffing. And we look at the Department of Revenue here in Colorado. We look at the taxation report. And this is one of the most recent numbers that we can get. March of 2020, the taxation on wine, liquor, and then beer products is listed there on the screen. Those numbers are in millions of gallons. So when we look at beer specifically, because it's the largest one on there, we're looking at 10.3 million gallons of beer was taxed in the month of March, just here in the state of Colorado. So I'm kind of a geek. I like my numbers. I did the equation on that to find out how many pints of beer that is. And it's actually 82.4 million pints of beer. So when we put that into perspective, is there a lot of alcohol being either sold or consumed in Colorado? Yes. Okay. We move forward, and this news article actually came out of the Denver Post just 2 weeks ago on July 13th. We look at this and we see that $192 million was spent on cannabis products in the month of May in the state of Colorado. All right. We can turn these numbers around in $192 million. That probably is not a tangible number for many of us. But when we look at this compared to the 5.8 million people that live in the state of Colorado, assuming that every purchase was made by a Colorado resident, that's $33 per person in the state of Colorado in the month of May was spent on a cannabis product. Every child, every teenager, every adult, every elderly person. $33 by every single citizen in the state of Colorado. That is a huge number. There is a lot of cannabis being purchased in the state of Colorado. So speaking of cannabis, if you're in the Denver Front Range area, the majority of people in Colorado like to consume their cannabis via an edible. I recently toured a production facility that made oils and edible products, and I was able to look at some of these products, and it is very hard to distinguish between a rice cake, a cookie, a candy that has the chemical THC, delta-9, THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, which is a psychoactive chemical in cannabis, with products that did not have that in it. So if you believe that you would be able to distinguish between those products, I would strongly disagree with you. So our movement in Colorado has been for years now that we're very open with our drug use. That is something that we need to come to grips with. That's something we need to acknowledge. And Denver decriminalized or made at the lowest possible criminal level psilocybin mushrooms, or in this case, magic mushrooms. So I did try to find this t-shirt to buy one, and they were out of my size, unfortunately, but Denver is a magical place. A tongue-in-cheek on that, I'm not serious with that, but it's definitely our environment here in Colorado is very much a pro-drug environment. So when we look at the current situation, we know that COVID has been hard on us. It's put us into places that we've never been before. We've been stressed like none other. We've been challenged like none other. We're homeschooling now for many of us, and that is a huge challenge. Just to put this in perspective, I've talked about, alcohol and cannabis and mushrooms, but prescription drug use has gone up 37% in the month of March alone for antipsychotics, anti-anxiety, antidepressant drugs. So the use of legitimate pharmaceutical drugs has gone up significantly as well. When we go into our next pillar of response, what do we do to react to this problem? We're going to start out talking about training and communication. Training is one of the most important things that you can proactively do for your staff. You need to be able to understand that it's behaviors that cause problems and not chemicals. I know that sounds kind of counterintuitive, but it's the behavior that causes the injuries. It's the behavior that causes the work productivity to drop. It's behaviors that cause the thefts. It's all of those things are connected to behaviors. I need to tell you that lead impairment training has both online and in-classroom trainings that are based on the current law enforcement tools that are out there. During my career of 24 years, I was able to acquire a lot of training that has propelled me to the top of the field in that industry. We transmitted that information into a corporate environment, which allows you to learn to be able to spot impairment prior to an accident, prior to a problem, prior to a lawsuit. Our goal is to save the employee if at all possible, provide them with treatment, and if necessary, you can use it obviously for termination procedures.
Mark, before you move forward, is there a difference between training requirements for DOT versus non-DOT workplaces?
There is, and it's very slight. The Department of Transportation requires 2 hours of training, 1 hour of alcohol and 1 hour of drug training. The requirement is a very vague description, and it doesn't necessarily require specific things. It just requires being able to spot the signs and symptoms of alcohol and drug use, okay? Now, if you are a non-DOT company, it just takes that 2 hour requirement away from you. I have both 1 hour, 2 hour, and 3 hour programs, which can allow you to grow as much as you feel necessary for your work environment. So thank you, Javier, for that. On that, your company needs to make sure that you review, at least on an annual basis, your drug and alcohol policy. If you do not have a drug and alcohol policy, I would encourage you to reach out to CCIG, specifically Javier, to create one, to get one drafted specifically for your company. I've done extensive review on companies' policies in the past, and we have found that often people are very vague and they are not specific enough to include drugs that otherwise are called illicit drugs. The problem with using the word illicit drugs is that many of the impairing chemicals that you can find in your kitchen, in your garage, in your custodial closet are just as dangerous as methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin. So if you do need help with that, I encourage you to reach out to Javier so that we could try to get that part of this problem locked down tight. Communication. Communication has been found to be one of the most important things. During this COVID crisis, we have learned that people need to receive communication in different modalities. And what I mean by that is we need to just not send emails. We need to send text messages. We need to make phone calls. We need to have literature displayed. We need to have documentation provided. In this slide here, you see 3 examples of free literature that's available both on the OSHA website and then on various federal government websites that you can find. Ironically, CCIG also has a library of materials that you can access at any time to post around your community, around your company resources. Put it on your doors, put it on your break rooms, put it on your bulletin boards. These are an easy way for you to communicate the priorities of your company for maintaining a drug-safe environment. Next, conduct regular meetings. This is super important. You need to be able to communicate with your employees regularly. Your messaging needs to be consistent. Drugs in this environment are not safe, and therefore we're not allowing them, period. You need to do what some people call lunch and learns or Toolbox Talks, where your supervisors are able to interact with your employees to get to talk to them and to learn some of the differences that go on with this. The companies that I've trained use these times to gauge their employees to see if there's any changes in behaviors which can indicate drug use. These are the behaviors that are going to be your first line indicator that there is a problem in your workplace. These topics, these concerns are learned in the reasonable suspicion class.
Can you give us an example of a few symptoms?
Yeah, Javier, that's a good question. You're going to look at people for a distinct change in their behavior. I, on a normal basis, talk a lot. You can ask my family, you can ask my friends that if I stop talking and I'm not engaged and interactive and smiley, that there's a problem. When you get to know your employees, you're going to know the drastic changes between their personality. Chronic dishonesty is probably on the top of the list. When people are missing work, when people are missing meetings, when they're missing assignments, where previously they were very punctual, very honest, and very reliable. Those are some of the biggest changes that you can look for. We can look at a person's demeanor. We can look at a person's body, their posture, their appearance, their skin. All of these things are very important for you to note. It's the change from what was normal before to what is present now. That change is going to be your best indicator. We're going to go into that next phase and we're going to look at the readiness. How do I maintain readiness for this? How do I maintain the ability to react to a concern, a complaint, a problem, an accident and that is through the pursuit of safety. We need to make safety a priority in our companies. We need to make safety, just like wearing harnesses, hard hats, and eyewear, just as important as people coming to work with a clean and sober mind. So how do we do this? How do we accomplish this? It's supporting our supervisors. We need to encourage our supervisors to be proactive. They need to be aggressively alert. They need to know their people very well. They need to understand that their obligation is the safeguarding of our work environment. So our supervisors need to be proactive, and that's part of the training piece, is that they need to know what to look for so that they can confront the employees as saying, hey, Mark, I see differences in you today, whatever those may be. Are you good? Are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help you? Those are some of the most important things. Drug testing is one of the most important things that you can do. Where there is no threat, there will not be a compliance with policy. Urine testing is the standard right now. We're finding that urine testing, which tests the metabolites or the waste products in the body, is not necessarily the most effective way to conduct business. The costs associated with it are high. The time that it takes the employee offline is unreasonable in most cases. It's almost punitive to a sober employee, because you're going to make me leave my job site where my work continues to grow, it continues to be present, but you're going to remove me from a work site for 1, 2, 3 hours, depending on the location that you use for testing. The urine testing requires supervision, which often requires that I empty my pockets, that I disrobe in some cases. It's a very humiliating process. Now, this is a DOT requirement, is the urine testing, and on the screen you're going to see the chemicals that they actually test for, which are somewhat limited to those 6 different chemicals. The amphetamines includes methamphetamine, so that's your number 6. We need to look at that because the new options that are coming out right now involve saliva. Saliva is a product that comes from the blood in the body, and the testing modality for urine versus saliva is different. There's a different mechanism, but it's a present indicator of drugs in a person's body, where the urine testing is a metabolite or the waste product. Now, this is one of the products that I've used in the past. I'm not endorsing it. It's a product that I use, that I trust, and it can have up to a 14-panel test to include alcohol. These are screening devices. So the way that I utilize these in the work environment is that I have employees take about 10 to 15 minutes out of their day. They place a swab in their mouth. The indicator then, once it's contained enough saliva, is placed into a reading device. Then that reading device tells me simply, with lines or no lines, if the chemical screen was present or not present. The devices are less expensive than urine testing, and if you do get a positive test, then what I would recommend is that you go to formal urine testing so that you can have a medical review officer review the file for your records. Now, if interested, Lead Impairment has teamed up with Advanta Labs out of Texas, and they do offer a saliva collection system that allows you to have a medical review officer review the chemicals that were detected in that test. They have a testing modality which allows there to be upwards of 160 some different chemicals tested for. So if you're concerned that the 6 chemicals that the DOT actually tests for is not enough, then we can expand that significantly utilizing this company. All right, so let's wrap this up. How do we prevent our workplaces from becoming dangerous? How do we keep them as safe as possible? And truly, it's by being properly aware of the problem, of knowing what's in front of us. We've learned that there's a lot of alcohol issues, there's a lot of cannabis issues, but on top of that, we haven't even touched on the opiates, the prescription drugs that are out there right now that are a problem. We're definitely inundated right now, especially with COVID, of all the different drugs that are out there. We need to be aware of these problems and know that they're a clear and present danger to our employees. Reasonable suspicion is just not a checkbox that we have to accomplish. It is actually an active way for us to watch our employees, to help them when perhaps things are getting rough, to save that employee from themselves. And I always remind my students, I always remind my participants is that these are tools that you can use in your day-to-day life. These are tools that you use with your own family members. I've had people email me in the past saying, hey, my babysitter kept coming to our house impaired and I never knew it until I took your class. So these are life skills that we can use outside the workplace, but definitely it is something that you need in every workplace. And then finally, on top of proper communication, we need to have engaged supervision. You need to know your employees. You need to know if there's a difference or a change in their normal behavior. We need to be able to communicate with each of our employees on a regular basis. Remember the different modalities of communication. It doesn't all have to be through email. It could be through phone calls, text messages. It could be through posters that you put up on their walls. But please, if nothing else, engage your employees as much as possible or encourage your supervision to do this. All right, so finally here, I have a friend who's a workman's comp attorney, and for years she's been telling her clients this phrase, if you could have done something, you should have done something. And the way that I take that is if you know that there's a potential of a problem for a problem, then you need to address that problem. Letting things just continue until the shoe drops is going to get you into a bad situation, and it's not being a responsible supervisor.
I'll give you a real life example of this. I worked with a trucking company a few years ago, and there was an employee that was known to be an alcoholic. Came in every morning, smelled like alcohol, but everybody knew that that was the previous night's activities. And so everybody simply just didn't address it because he came in, he could speak normally, he acted normally, and nobody ever addressed it. This driver came in one morning, got in his truck, started leaving the operation, went down the street, unfortunately, veered in front of a lady, stopped at a stoplight, hit the vehicle, ended up killing a mother of 9. The reason why I bring this to your attention is because it's the largest individual claim I've ever worked on in my entire career. It was a situation where literally every carrier associated with this account got in the room and agreed to pay maximum limits for each one of the policies to simply try and keep the story out of the media because it was so devastating. It was a mother of 9 children. She was a pillar in the community, very much into her church. And, she was killed by a gentleman who was still legally drunk at the time of the incident. So this leads back perfectly to Mark's slide where it says, if you could have done something, you should have done something, because the management within that facility absolutely knew that this guy had a potential problem and did nothing. And the end result was unfortunately a lady passed away. Thanks, Mark, for giving us some additional information today. That was wonderful. Before we close today, I want to make sure that everyone knows about CCIG's Risk Management Center. I'm talking about our online portal that's available to CCIG clients, which features hundreds of safety videos and pre-written safety policies, most of which are in English and Spanish. The portal also includes options to assign and track training, monitor certificates of insurance, record accident information and data, and many of our clients also use the portal to report incidents directly to their insurance carriers. I also wanted to quickly introduce our risk management team, which includes a staff analyst, claims associates who have helped companies successfully manage tens of millions of dollars in claims, and risk control professionals who help you avoid injuries and accidents, and again, save you money while getting the job done. I also wanted to provide you with a quick example. A few weeks ago on a Saturday, you'll remember we had a high wind event here in Denver. A client of ours' roof began to peel off of his establishment. We were able to get a roofer on site within an hour of that client's phone call. This speaks to our dedication as a risk management team here at CCIG and our trusted network of vendors like Lead Impairment. With that, I'd like to say thank you to Mark. Thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar. If you have any other questions, please know that we will be sending out a follow-up email in the next day or two with a recording of the webinar along with our contact information. Now, we've got a few minutes left here, so I think we'll go ahead and dive into the questions that have been submitted. And if you still want to submit a question, you've got time to do so, so we'll just run through these individually. The first question is, what would you recommend I implement for a non-DOT company as far as a program or training?
You know, Javier, that's a great question, and it's truly up to you as an employer what you would like. In the past, LEAD has provided everything from general employee talks, where we come in and cover policy, we cover substance abuse procedures and testing and expectations. I would, at a minimum, want your supervisors, your LEAD employees, or your safety team members to be able to know what to look for. And then ownership of the company, I would encourage them to realize that they need to be trained as well too, because problems don't just exist out in the field, they occur in the office as well. So we need to just have a complete level of knowledge increase. We do provide guidance on drug testing if that's something that's of interest to you. But at a minimum, I would definitely have your supervisors and your LEAD employees have the knowledge and the skills to know what to do in a situation if it ever arises.
Okay. The next two questions are kind of interrelated. So the first of which is, if an employee tests positive, can I terminate them? And I guess I can answer this question. The gist of it all is you absolutely can. However, you absolutely need to make sure that you've got a solid policy in place that lists disciplinary action associated with drug or alcohol use in the workplace. So yes, you can terminate somebody. However, you need to make sure you've got the policies and procedures in place behind it to support that termination. Otherwise, you might have a legal issue on your hands. The second question, which is kind of interrelated, and I'll go ahead and tackle that one as well, Mark. What if an employee comes to me and asks for help with substance abuse problem? What are my obligations as an employer? Well, it depends by the state, but the vast majority of states have very clear language on this, which essentially states if somebody comes to you with a substance abuse problem, you have an obligation to assist them. Does that mean you have to pay for it? Not necessarily, but you do have to recognize that, and you do have to supply them with help, or at least lead them in the right direction for help. At that point, their employment is protected, and you cannot terminate somebody for coming to you and telling you they have a problem. So just be aware of that. So if somebody comes to you ahead of time and says, hey, I've got a substance abuse problem, I'm a cocaine addict, you can't immediately terminate for that. You have to provide them substance abuse training first. Now, if they're in a safety-sensitive job, for instance, they drive a vehicle for the company, you can prevent them from doing safety-sensitive jobs until they've completed a substance abuse program. However, you cannot terminate them permanently from your establishment. The next question, can I use my workers' comp clinic to conduct reasonable suspicion training?
You know what, I'll tackle this one. Typically, workmen's comp clinics are there to deal with injuries and possibly take urine testing samples. Often they do not provide the training, and my background was dealing with people, was dealing with behaviors, and our instruction is based upon that interaction. I don't believe that you should use your workman's comp clinic to do the training, because I don't think that you're going to get the proper level of education that you need in these situations.
Okay. And the final question we have right now is there special documentation and guidelines that have to be followed to require testing under reasonable suspicion?
There is not, but documentation is required. In the class, you'll learn that we rely on what do we see, what do we hear, and what do we smell. I provide a reasonable suspicion checklist, which can give you guidance and direction and remind you of some of the common observations that may be present. And you can use this in the report that you do. I often encourage supervisors to have another trained supervisor co-witness the events or even the interaction with the employee so that you can have more than one opinion. There is nothing formal that is required, but I do train you on how to write a proper report and how to make sure the documentation has as much detail in it as possible.
Okay, we don't have any additional questions. So with that, on behalf of Lead Impairment Training at CCIG, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.